So since Iran doesn't really have the traditional organized political party system, where does the power really come from?
It is true, Iran does not have political parties in the same way that you will find them in the West. Instead, you have factions organized around families and older institutions. So in many different ways, you have the old society in which you're putting a political layer above it, rather than actually building real strong institutions through parties, etc. You never see, I mean, parties usually in Iran, they do exist, but they represent one individual. So, you know, if you're a strong political personality, then you will have a party, and you will be the head of that party as long as you live, essentially. So it's very, very different from what you have over here. It doesn't mean that you don't end up having, within that political elite, pluralism, in the sense that power is dispersed throughout that system. It's not all in the hands of one person, as it would, for instance, be in the case of Saddam Hussein's Iraq. All power essentially came from Saddam Hussein, and he could do more or less what he wanted. There was not a lot of different things that he had to compromise with. That's not the case in Iran. But just because there's more of a pluralistic distribution of power doesn't mean that it has ended up being a democratic nature to the system. On the contrary, the power is distributed amongst a small clique of elites, and they have very little accountability to the population.
Excellent. And the second question, in your speech, you talked briefly about the revolutionary generation, but then what do you think that this generation's youth, what do you think that their role was in the previous election and the current political movements in Iran, and what they have in store for them in their future?
There's not going to be any change in Iran by virtue of its demographic, in which the youth will not play a significant role, if not perhaps even the most important role. You're talking about a country in which more than 60–70% of the population are under the age of 35. So regardless of what happens, the youth are going to be a critical component of that. And this is a very tech-savvy, smart youth, very globalized, very much willing to be part of the larger international community. It's going to be increasingly difficult for a regime to try to cut them off from the rest of the world. What I'm concerned about, however, is that the effort to isolate the youth is not just taking place by the government itself. It's also as an unfortunate side effect of the sanctions that the international community, particularly the United States, is imposing on Iran, because that's also making it more difficult for the youth to be able to connect with the outside.